Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Please, Mario, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Julia, for having me today. My name is Mario Madeddu. I'm the head of risk and compliance, and I'm based in Luxembourg. I work for Amazon Payments Europe. I've been with the company for about 13 years now.
Thank you for your time and thank you for joining our talk today. I have a few questions for you. First of all, I would like to ask you, what do you think it's a foundational skill for a student or someone in early career professional that wants to join the AML force, what they should look out for?
Well, it's a great question. And when I look back at my career, I don't think that growing up I would have ever thought to ever get involved in the field of compliance. Like, no one grows up and says, I want to be a chief compliance officer. Usually it's I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot. No one, wakes up and says, I want to be a CCO. So I kind of fell into it. And I learned on the job. And this is one of the things that I was incredibly lucky during my career. I was given the time to learn. I joined the company, it's a lifetime ago. It's over 12 years now. Back in the UK. Initially, I started off my compliance career in London. And back then, I was primarily working in first line, meaning operations, anti-fraud. So I appreciated all that goes behind the scenes into running a regulated entity from a first line perspective. And then with the years, as the company grew, I had the opportunity to get closer and closer and closer to the compliance team, which back then was so small. Compliance ultimately evolved over the past really 15 years into supporting companies grow and scale. Before it was seen as the back office of any bank. Everyone remembers the old style compliance officer sitting on a big chair, looking at policies and saying yes or no. These days, not like that. We've evolved, and all for a good reason. It's all about governance, being flexible and being agile enough to enable the business whilst operating within established parameters. How I learned compliance was actually my real journey in second line. I would say started off around 7-8 years ago, and that's when I made a transition between first and second line. Back then, I was actually part of what was called as the payments risk team, and a big shout out to my previous chief compliance officer. Her name is Noor. She's still currently part of the company. She was kind enough to bring me on board as a money laundering reporting officer back then, and that's the rest is history. There was, though, a pivotal and a cornerstone in my learning journey in compliance, and that actually happened 3 years ago when the European Business Institute of Luxembourg approached me to get involved in teaching compliance. And Julia, you and I went to school together. I never seen myself as a professor. I was always used to sitting behind a table, taking notes, not giving lectures. But actually, I've done that for 3 years, and it's been fantastic. So to everyone who's listening to this, take the opportunity to learn. Honestly, there are some great courses from ACAMS, ICA, take that, and also, if you're interested in the European Business Institute, that's another fantastic opportunity that gives you the platform to learn virtually at a distance, affordably as well in Luxembourg.
There is a lot to learn on the books, but ultimately it's a lot to learn on the job. I think that's probably the key point of compliance, right?
Okay. One thing that my current manager always says is you cannot buy experience, meaning you need to learn on the job. And that's critical because, yes, you can read as many books as you want, but if you don't master the practical those ideas, you're never going to be successful, because ultimately one thing is to learn about frameworks. policies. The other thing is going through a regulated audit, a board meeting, a regulated interview, or even a business launch, and understanding how to balance business speed with good governance principles that are expected, especially in an heavily regulated environment such as the European Union. We've seen all of the different directives being implemented on AML in Europe as the guinea pig of standard setter globally. So reading about those in one thing, trying to implement them in your day-to-day, it's another, because especially being part of a compliance team, yes, you're part of an advisory team, nonetheless, you're part of a business. And so the goal is to really enable business scale, decision-making, whilst ensuring that you're also enabling your management and board to discharge their responsibilities accordingly. So what I'm trying to say is that it's great to learn, absolutely. I'm never going to say don't do it, actually do it, but always trying to find the opportunity to practically apply those learnings in a day-to-day environment. Being in compliance, you're not working in a cubicle. You actually are required to interface with dozens of teams, and you know that better than me probably. It takes a certain level of interpersonal skills that you need to develop. And you can't hide behind a poor presentation. You need to be able to articulate your thoughts in front of very senior leaders. And so, especially when you are pushed in terms of risk appetite, everyone is great at discussing at a high level what risk appetite stands for. But when you combine it with KRIs and then link it to decision making, that's when it gets complex. But that's where the fun starts as well. And all of that is practiced through iteration, and it's okay. You're not always going to get it right.
I think there is a lot of people that wants to get into compliance. When I started, maybe a little bit after you, but still many years ago, I don't think anybody wanted to go into compliance. I didn't hear this big desire, but now either I talk to people or I get approached by people that want to talk about compliance and want to get into compliance. So there's definitely more and more interest into getting into a compliance career. Where do you think there are professional opportunities for AML compliance, especially looking at AI developments of the past couple of years?
It's a great question. Look, I'll break it down for you in a few components. So years and years ago, the concept of compliance, whenever you talked about compliance, everyone talked about financial services, CCOs in a bank, or compliance professionals working for a bank. Over the years, the economy has evolved, and this is where you've seen now a lot of fintechs coming to light, all obviously involved mostly in primarily payments, but there are also other companies involved in other types of compliance, alternative assets, funds, investments. So now, which is a separate thing of investment, right? So now the concept of compliance is getting more granular, because you're not talking just about assets, you're talking about different types of virtual assets, different types of risk exposures, different types of payments, acquiring, dispersing. So we're actually getting more refined from an understanding of the different technologies that sit behind the overall global payment infrastructure. So we're able to also cater for those type of payments as well as investments by creating then dedicated compliance teams to support those businesses. However, compliance is not just about payments. Nowadays, compliance is about other areas as well, product compliance, ESG. You can talk about different types of compliance. So the concept of compliance is not just about money, it's also about other different aspects of any day-to-day company's investments, such as, for example, like I said, product compliance. There are different regulations that are required to ensure that those different, that the products that you sell are compliant in relation to those specifics. So my advice is, like I said, it's very difficult to grow up and think, I want to be in compliance. However, compliance is not just about laws and legislations, it's much more than that. These are leadership roles that allow you to have to be exposed to leaderships who have decision-making power in companies. So the level of responsibility and personal accountability is very important. I don't need to repeat this. Chief compliance officers are obviously personally liable to regulators, and so are authorized managers. So there is an aspect of ability to deal with important situations that whoever is thinking about going down this career path needs to consider. It's really down the individual. So if you are interested in really understanding how companies work, the obligation enterprises need to follow in order to be compliant with the overall legislative frameworks, compliance is for you. It's a great mixture, especially if you have a legal background, or even like ourselves, right? International relations, who can easily cater for this type of environment where you need to be able to articulate yourself well in front of others. You need to be able to articulate your thoughts and decisions in front of senior leaders. You need to come prepared with data and arguments to defend your position. But also it comes with a lot of pros. For example, the ability to also get exposed to what's happening in the international sector through conferences, even these great podcasts. These are all great opportunities that come with these roles because these are very niche. Being in compliance is not being for example, in sales where there are millions of people doing it. It's actually very, very niche, very refined, where in most cases, chief compliance officers also need to be approved personally by the regulator in order to have that role. So, I mean, if you're looking for something that is exciting, cutting edge, exposed to AI, especially, this is the role for you. And Julia, when you talked about AI, I'll take 2 seconds to explain as well. Now is the time to get involved from a compliance perspective in AI, because laws and regulations are still being defined in relation to the role of governance and the board of directors in the involvement on artificial intelligence. You can't simply deploy new models in a company without any oversight. So it's a great opportunity for us, we're going through it right now, to get stuck in with the risk assessments, understanding how these models work, explaining to authorized management, inviting questions that are data-driven to ensure that you're actually understanding the type of changes that you're introducing to your overall architecture. So it's super exciting, and we are at the forefront of this great innovation right now.
I think you mentioned a few times international aspects, and especially the European Union. I never worked in the European Union in anti-money laundering, so you are the expert here, and I want to hear from you. How can a company that has international exposure can deal with different jurisdiction, especially from a governance perspective? I can imagine it might be quite challenging.
Yeah, it's again another great question, and that depends on the structure that the company adopts in any given jurisdiction. For example, in the European Union, we are fortunate enough where, for example, from an electronic money institution, you can passport your services through the different countries within the EU, which from a legislative standpoint is great, because that means that all of your customers as well as technology is subjected to the same level of requirements, and so the investments that you need to put as well as the customer experience that you're subjecting customers doesn't change between the different countries. Now, important aspect that we need to consider is that in compliance there are no shortcuts, and that's one thing that everyone needs to get clear in their head, because the less you invest in compliance, the more you are exposing your company and your customers to potential risk. Be that from an exposure to bad actors perspective, be that from a company perspective to regulatory scrutiny. you don't want to be in that situation for a number of multiple reasons. First of all, it's not the right thing to do. So ethically, you shouldn't be thinking like that. So if you're looking at setting up a business in the European Union, one of the great things about the EU, if you're looking to 2 years down the line, it's going to be the introduction of the EU AML package, which comprises of 3 big components, one of them being the introduction of a EU-level anti-money laundering authority, supervisory authority, which is a first of its kind. The other packages as well include a much needed standardization of all of the different components that have been introduced with the directives over the past 10, 15 years, so that every single country can then set up a framework that is almost a like for like between one and the other. So Julia, what you asked is a fantastic question, and it's one that in 2 years it's going to answer itself, because there is going to be such a material change in the legislative framework that no one will be able to take different approaches. Everyone will be subjected to the same. Again, with the ability to then, in certain cases where possible, passport service. For example, you can also decide to set up your offices in one specific country and then have limited coverage in others. And so you can double down on investments on their home country. That's what we call it.
Yeah, interesting. I am very much focused on Australia, and also Australia is going through legal changes. So I'm always looking for updates there. And it's interesting to hear that the AML space is moving everywhere. It's not just Australia. Wherever you look, the AML space is moving. I have another topic that I really like, and I feel that I never had the chance to talk about this enough. My family and friends are very tired of me talking about this. What do you think about sanction screening? And again, also going beyond the European Union, the United States has such a strict and very formal, comprehensive sanction screening procedures, which I imagine will impact you in your job in a way.
Right. Whenever it's funny enough, because one of my last classes last week through the European Business Institute was actually about sanctions. And I always start off with the different frameworks and regimes that are in place. And OFAC is always top of the list. You're absolutely right. It's one of the most, I call them sophisticated sanction regimes out there, because it's so complex. And it goes into such a detail that allows you to really appreciate the complexity of sanction regimes. Now, obviously, whenever we talk about sanctions, we always break it down in terms of what is really a sanction. Sanction is a political instrument, right? It allows you to bring forward your policy objectives in the respect of your internal objectives, right? And so OFAC is one of those regimes that, obviously, working in a company that is a subsidiary of a US company, we are subjected to OFAC regimes, absolutely. But the complexity comes in when you then need to combine multiple regimes. In our case, the European Union as well as United Nations regime, alongside with the Luxembourg regime. This is where it gets very interesting. And to your question, what I think about sanction screening, you need to get it right. You really need to get it right, because sanctions, and we've seen a number of fines over the past few years. If you remember, I still to this day remember the fine that was issued to Binance 3 or 4 years ago, which was in the billions of US dollars for having processed payments from individuals based in North Korea. Not only there is a monetary amount that is attached to these violations, there is a reputational component, and there is a personal liability for the people in charge of the company. So you really want to safeguard and make sure that your sanctions screening framework is up to speed. And what does that mean in practice is there are different ways of thinking, and that depends on the size and complexity of your business. Some businesses decide to develop a sanction screening system in-house. Some others decide to outsource it, which again, it's fine. There are some great companies out there who can support you. However, one of the things that people need to get right, companies need to get right, is the fact that may outsource the task, but you cannot outsource the ultimate responsibility. That means that internally, you still need to conduct internal audit missions on screening systems, assurance missions on your screening frameworks, as well as compliance missions to make sure that everything that is in your lovely policies is actually being done in practice. Otherwise, those policies just remain beautiful pieces of paper that no one follows. So sanction for me is always top of list, the top of mind, top of list. And it's one of the things that you always need to get right as a professional, because that's where it's really, really wrong if you don't apply the right levels of effort and due diligence and investments as well.
We covered a lot of grounds. I think these considerations on sanctions are applicable pretty much to any reporting entity, whatever they are. So those are very, very good comments that I hope our audience will enjoy. Also, I enjoyed your considerations on professionals, because I think there is a lot of people in Australia right now that are thinking about a career in AML. So hopefully they'll take this notes.
Yeah.
And do you have any closing remarks for our audience?
No, I just wanted to say massive thank you, Julia, for having me. Hopefully this is one of many times that I'm going to be on your podcast. Looking forward to chatting again. And yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mario. Absolutely. You're already invited for another time. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much.